For a century, the map of North American trade had a single beating heart, the United States. All roads, rails, and shipping lanes flowed through it, a continent intertwined by a shared economic destiny. Now, America's closest allies are spending $120 billion to perform a radical surgery. They are building a new trade corridor of steel and silicon designed for one purpose: to cut the United States out of the picture. Fueled by presidential tariffs and powered by border-defying technology, it's an alliance of defiance that threatens to make America a bystander to its own neighborhood's commerce. How did an attempt to build economic walls result in America's neighbors building a superhighway around them? To understand the sheer audacity of this new corridor, you must first understand the world it was designed to replace. For decades, North America operated as a single continental factory, with the United States as its undisputed central nervous system. Its veins and arteries were the highways of Texas, the railways of the Midwest, and the ports of California, through which nearly all continental commerce flowed. Under the architecture of NAFTA, goods, parts, and capital moved effortlessly across borders. This wasn't just trade, it was a deeply integrated codependency. A car's journey was the perfect example. A transmission built in Mexico and an engine block forged in Canada would meet on an assembly line in Michigan. This intricate dance of logistics was the pinnacle of globalized efficiency, creating trillions in shared wealth. The system wasn't just efficient, it was predictable, and the United States held all the keys to the kingdom. But that predictability shattered during the first Trump administration. The doctrine of America First reframed the relationship. Allies were no longer seen purely as partners, but as economic competitors who had, in this view, taken advantage of American generosity. The weapon of choice was the tariff, often justified by invoking obscure national security clauses that branded friendly neighbors as potential threats. The constant threat of new tariffs created a chilling effect on investment. How could a company build a new factory in Mexico or expand a parts plant in Ontario if its access to the final market in the U.S. could be severed by a single tweet? For leaders in Ottawa and Mexico City, this was more than a trade dispute. It was an existential wake-up call. They realized that the very foundation of their economic models, unfettered access to the U.S. market, could be revoked overnight. The United States, once the guarantor of the system, had become its single greatest source of instability. Trust, the invisible lubricant of this multi-trillion-dollar machine, was corroding. The quiet, behind-the-scenes conversations about reducing this dependency began. It was no longer a theoretical exercise. It was a matter of national economic survival. The breaking point came not as a slow fracture, but as a deliberate explosion. In early July 2025, the Trump administration unleashed its most aggressive trade action to date, transforming years of rhetoric into a concrete threat. The White House announced its intention to impose a crippling 35% tariff on all goods imported from Canada, effective August 1st. This wasn't a policy debated in Congress. It was presented as an ultimatum, a non-negotiable demand. The official reasoning was a familiar list of grievances about unfair trade practices, but insiders and analysts saw it for what it was: a high-pressure tactic designed to force Ottawa into submission on a range of other issues ahead of the G20 summit. The underlying strategy was pure disruption. By threatening the economic lifeblood of its northern neighbor, the administration believed it could dictate terms and demonstrate its America First resolve to a global audience. The message was clear: the era of friendly, rules-based trade was over. The new doctrine was one of economic dominance, where access to the vast U.S. market was a privilege that could be revoked at will. While Canada was the immediate target, Mexico was watching with profound apprehension. The threat against one USMCA partner was implicitly a threat against all. The White House's action signaled that the entire framework of North American trade, painstakingly built over 30 years, was now subject to the political whims of the executive branch. The U.S. was leveraging its geographic position, as the continent's central corridor, assuming that its neighbors had no choice but to comply. After all, for decades, getting goods from a factory in Mexico to a consumer in Canada, or vice versa, almost invariably meant transiting through the United States, through its ports, its railways, and its interstate highway system. This transit wasn't just a matter of convenience, it was a structural dependency. Every truck that crossed the border at Laredo or Buffalo, every container processed by U.S. Customs and Border Protection (CBP) reinforced America's central role and generated revenue. It was estimated that the merchandise processing fee alone, a small charge on each import entry, brought in over $1.26 billion annually for the U.S. government. The Trump administration's gamble was that this dependency was absolute. They believed that Canada and Mexico were trapped, with no viable alternative to using the American corridor. It was a spectacular miscalculation of their neighbors' ingenuity and their will to break free. The response from Canada and Mexico was not one of panic, but of calculated, coordinated defiance. Rather than engage in a war of words with Washington, they turned to each other. On July 16, 2025, as reported by Reuters, Prime Minister Mark Carney and President Claudia Sheinbaum held a joint press conference pledging to strengthen their strategic and commercial cooperation. That was diplomatic code for a seismic shift. Behind the scenes, they were activating a long-brewing plan, the establishment of a true north-south trade corridor designed explicitly to bypass the United States. This was more than a political statement. It was a strategy backed by massive, concrete infrastructure investments. In Mexico, President Sheinbaum's administration committed billions toward modernizing national port infrastructure. The centerpiece of that effort is a 3.07 billion Mexican pesos, approximately 180 million USD expansion of the port of Manzanillo on the Pacific coast, with the goal of transforming it into the largest and most efficient port in Latin America. By 2024, Manzanillo was already handling nearly 4 million shipping containers annually. The expansion project aims to more than double that capacity to 10 million containers per year, a dramatic leap in throughput. This initiative is part of a broader 33 billion Mexican pesos, approximately $1.6 billion US national strategy to upgrade key Mexican ports including Ensenada, Veracruz, Altamira, and Lázaro Cárdenas, effectively creating a modernized Pacific to Gulf trade infrastructure ready to divert global cargo flows away from U.S. soil. At the other end of the corridor, Canada was making parallel moves. The port of Prince Rupert in British Columbia, already a major hub, was undergoing its own expansion. While its 2024 volume was a solid 23.1 million tons, growth in 2025 was surging. By mid-year, it had already handled over 13.1 million tons, an 8.8% increase, proving it had the capacity to handle more traffic. The vision, as described in publications like Freight News, was a $120 billion northern corridor, a seamless network connecting Mexico's Pacific ports directly to Canada's via rail links that run entirely within their own borders. The most revolutionary aspect, however, was invisible. To circumvent the bureaucratic hurdles of U.S. Customs, the two nations were collaborating on a shared blockchain-based customs data system. This single window would allow goods to be cleared for entry into both countries before they even left their port of origin, creating a frictionless digital border that made the physical U.S. border irrelevant for their bilateral trade. It was a brilliant and audacious plan to reroute not just goods, but the very flow of commerce around their unpredictable neighbor. This Canada-Mexico pact created an immediate and deeply uncomfortable dilemma for the United States. The tariff threat, designed to assert American dominance, had instead catalyzed the creation of a rival economic artery. The White House was now trapped in a vice of its own making. If it proceeded with the 35% tariff on Canada, it would only accelerate the exodus of trade to the new bypass corridor, guaranteeing the very economic damage the policy was supposed to prevent. It would be punishing American businesses and consumers while its neighbors solidified their new partnership. However, if it backed down and rescinded the tariff threat, it would be a humiliating political defeat. It would signal to the world that its strong-arm tactics could be successfully defied, emboldening other nations and undermining its authority. The United States, accustomed to being the indispensable nation at the center of North American trade, was suddenly facing the prospect of becoming an inconvenient detour. The very tools it used to control the flow of goods were now the primary reason for them to flow elsewhere, leaving America to watch from the sidelines. For Canada and Mexico, the cost of Trump's tariffs was not measured in damages, but in ambitious investments. The crisis became the catalyst to turn blueprints into reality. In Canada, the port of Prince Rupert transformed from a strategic asset into the nation's economic front line. The 8.8% surge in cargo volume in early 2025 wasn't just a statistic. It meant more jobs for longshoremen, more shifts for rail workers, and a boom for the entire logistics ecosystem of British Columbia. The port, which already facilitates an estimated $240 billion in trade, became the northern anchor of a new continental spine. This created a wave of optimism in Western Canada, which now saw its future tied not just to the U.S. Midwest, but directly to the booming markets of Latin America and Asia. In Mexico, the impact was even more profound. President Sheinbaum's massive investment in ports like Manzanillo was a bold declaration of economic sovereignty. The $3.07 billion expansion project wasn't just about pouring concrete. It was about building a future where Mexico's trade destiny wasn't solely dependent on crossing the Rio Grande. The project created thousands of construction jobs and signaled to global shipping lines that Mexico was positioning itself as the premier logistics hub of the Americas. For both nations, the bypass corridor represented a fundamental rewriting of their economic geography, a costly but necessary investment to insulate themselves from future political shocks from their powerful neighbor. Back in the United States, the blowback from its own policy was severe and multifaceted. The most immediate threat was to the very heart of American manufacturing, the auto industry. According to the Alliance for Automotive Innovation, the sector supports over 10 million American jobs, a complex ecosystem utterly dependent on the seamless cross-border flow of parts. With a bypass corridor in place, a scenario where Canadian and Mexican plants could trade components directly without touching U.S. soil became terrifyingly real. A survey indicated that 41% of auto parts suppliers were already considering shifting production to Canada or Mexico to avoid the tariff uncertainty. This threatened a hollowing out of the industrial Midwest. But the damage wasn't just hypothetical. A detailed analysis by Freight News painted a devastating picture of the potential financial losses. Over 5 years, the U.S. could lose an estimated $245 billion in economic activity. This includes $69 billion in lost tariff revenue, $17 billion in lost port and border service profits, and a staggering $39 billion from job losses tied to the logistics and transport sectors. Even the seemingly small merchandise processing fee collected by CBP, amounting to over $1.2 billion a year, was now at risk as trade volumes shifted to the bypass. The policy designed to protect American interests was now directly threatening American jobs and government revenue on a massive scale. And so, North America stands at a crossroads it never anticipated. An attempt by the United States to use its central position as a weapon has backfired, prompting its closest allies to engineer a multi-billion-dollar workaround. Canada and Mexico, once beholden to American infrastructure, are now building a future where they control their own commercial destiny. The United States faces the prospect of becoming an island in its own continent, its economic leverage eroded by the very policies designed to enhance it. The map of North American trade has been permanently redrawn, not by cooperation, but by defiance. In the race to define the future, will North America win together, or will all three sides lose trying to go it alone? Are you American, Canadian, or Mexican? Share your story and your perspective in the comments below.